So guys, Minecraft 1.21 is out, which means custom enchantments are here, and that means that you guys probably want to learn how to make your own. Now, if you are one of those people, this video is for you. Welcome to my 1.21 custom enchantment tutorial. In this video, we're going to go over how to add a custom enchantment into the game and put it on a weapon. And that's about it, because that really should take up the span of one entire video. Before we actually get into the thick of it, I'm going to start with a couple of disclaimers. First, I expect that you, if you're watching this video, already are familiar with the process of data packs, making data packs, and how they work. And I also hope that you are already pretty familiar with how JSON notation works. Now, JSON notation is what is used by pretty much every type of data pack file except functions and structure NBT. So if you've ever made anything like an advancement or a loot table or a predicate, then you know what JSON is, and you should be good to go. So, assuming you're on board, let's go ahead and jump into it. I've just made a new data pack. I've got data pack.mcmeta. Under the data folder, I just need to add a namespace. I'll make it tutorial. Inside the namespace, I need to add a folder called enchantment. And then under this folder is where I'm just going to put my enchantment files. Now you can name this file whatever you want. I'm just going to call it basic enchantment, and it has to be .json. As with all data pack files, the combination of the namespace and the name of this file will be how you reference this enchantment later. And so I am going to just basically be building up this enchantment one step at a time. Like with most things, you just start with an empty object, and we're going to start filling it with fields. The first one we're going to add is the description. Now the description is just going to be a string or a JSON text component, and it's basically just going to be what shows up when you actually mouse over the item and look at the enchantment. So this sword is enchanted with sharpness, and the description is just the word sharpness. That number 1 actually comes from another field that we'll add later. So just like the word sharpness on that sword, whatever I put right here in this string, which I'll call it example, this will be what shows up when I actually mouse over the item and look at its enchantments. So the next thing we're going to add to our enchantment is the list of supported items. Now this can either be an item tag as a string, or it can be a single item, or it can also be a list of item IDs. And this basically tells us what items this enchantment is intended to work on. So for the sake of this example, I'm just going to say this enchantment will work on a netherite sword. Now the next thing you can add after supported items is actually primary items. And this is a completely optional field. You don't have to include it if you don't want to. But if you do specify primary items, it's exactly like supported items. You can put a tag, an ID, or a list. And the difference between the two is that supported items is the list of all items for which this enchantment actually works, and you can use /enchant with it. Primary items are the items it is primarily intended for, which may be different from the ones it's supported for. Now an example of this is how sharpness works on both swords and axes, but in order to get it on an axe you have to use an anvil. You can't find it in an enchanting table, and you can't find it on like mob loot and stuff like that. So for the sharpness enchantment, only swords are in the primary items, but both swords and axes are in the supported items. Now again, primary items is completely optional, and if you omit it, it will just default to being exactly the same as the supported items. So moving on, the next thing to add is the slots. Now the slots is always a list of strings, and this basically tells the game where the item has to be in your inventory in order for the enchantment to actually work. Now your options for slots are any one of these, and I'm just going to make it main hand. So now that we've got all that settled, the next few fields that we're going to add all have to do with how the enchantment is treated when you see it in an anvil or an enchanting table. Basically how much it costs. We've got weight, anvil cost, and then finally min cost and max cost. Now the values that you actually give to all of these fields are kind of up to you. It really depends on how expensive or cheap you want the advancement to be. What I've done here is shown you what the minimums for all of them are. Weight has to be at least 1, but the rest of all of these can be 0. As you'll see later, probably in another episode of this, I often make custom enchantments that are purely technical, so they're not really meant to show up. They just appear on an item and give it custom behavior as if I'm adding an entirely new item to the game. For technical enchantments like that, I like to set all those values to their absolute minimums. But if you're planning on this enchantment actually showing up in the enchanting table, then you can adjust these however you like. Weight basically affects how likely the enchantment is to show up in the enchanting table. And for vanilla advancements, it usually ranges somewhere between 1 and 10, although you can technically set it to way higher values than that if you want to. Anvil cost is also usually pretty low. It's between, 1 and 10 as well. These two can get quite a bit higher. Min cost is usually somewhere between like 5 and 20. Max cost can get up into like the 60s or even 80s sometimes. Now these fields that say per level above first, basically what they do is that if you have a level of this enchantment that's higher than 1, well for each level that's higher than 1, they add this value onto this one. So if the base was 10 and the per level above first was 2, well then it'd be 10 at level 1, 12 at level 2, 14 at level 3, and so on and so forth. And that actually brings me to the last field that we need to add, which is max level, which is self-explanatory. It just lets you decide how high of a level you want to allow this enchantment to have. Now, one interesting thing to note about the max level field is that it actually does have a bearing on that description that we talked about earlier. So here I have a sword enchanted with sharpness 1, and the reason that 1 shows up is actually because the max level of sharpness is not 1. I've also got a bow enchanted with infinity, and you can see that there's not a number after the word infinity. That is achieved by setting the max level to 1. So if you set it to anything above 1, the number will show up, but if it is 1, it won't. So I'll go ahead and set it to 3 for this example, and there we go. This is the bare minimum that an enchantment can be. So now that we've reached this point, it might actually be a good idea to test it out and actually see if we can put our enchantment on an item in the game. Now, this data pack is loaded on the server that I'm on right now, but I can't apply these changes just by doing /reload because enchantments are not reloadable. So to see my enchantment, I've got to restart the server, which I will do here in just a second. Okay, I've just restarted the server, and it's time to test my new enchantment. I specified that it specifically would go on netherite swords, so I'm gonna test it with a netherite sword. And in my experience, the best way to test if it actually worked is just to type /enchant at S, and then see if you can find your enchantment. So I think I called it tutorial basic enchantment. And there we go. So now if I look at the sword, it's enchanted with example 1. The name of the enchantment is example and its level is 1. Now something else I can try is to get myself a new sword and see if I can enchant it with a higher level. So if I enchant it with 3, then it will be example 3. That's great. Now I specified that the max level was 3. So if I try to do 4, it won't work because the enchantment specified that it only goes up to 3. So now I've got an enchanted sword, but as you may have picked up, this enchantment doesn't actually do anything. Now in some cases, that might be exactly what you want. If you're making a big data pack that runs a lot of tests on items, maybe what you want is an enchantment that you can interact with like normal enchantments, like you can use it in an enchanting table or put it on with an anvil, but the actual logic of it is driven by other functions in the game, and if that's the case, this enchantment is pretty much complete. In that case, you'd basically just be testing for the enchantment using functions and predicates, the same way you'd be testing for like custom data on a custom item. So with that in mind, your next question might be, okay, so how do I actually get it in game? How do I get it in the enchanting table? And that is where Minecraft's enchantment tags come in, and that's going to be the last thing we cover this episode. Let's say I wanted to make this enchantment show up in the enchanting table. Well, how you do that is actually pretty simple. You just go back into the data pack. Under the data folder next to your namespace, you want to add in the Minecraft namespace if you hadn't already. That's okay. That's how you spell Minecraft. There we go. Under the Minecraft namespace, you want to add tags, and under tags, you're going to add enchantment. Now, the file I'm going to add in this folder is just going to be called inenchantingtable.json, and it is just a tag. It's just like any other tag, and I can add values to it. The value I'm going to add here is tutorial example enchantment. Or wait, no, basic enchantment. Jeez, I already forgot its name. There we go. So now that I've added this enchantment to the in enchanting table tag, it should theoretically show up in the enchanting table. Because tags are reloadable, I can actually just go ahead and reload this. I don't have to restart the entire server, assuming I've already finished defining my enchantment. And I'm going to see if I can actually find it inside the enchanting table. I'm going to put it in, and nope, that one didn't have it. Let's see. Okay, I haven't actually been able to find it, and I think the problem might be that I actually set the min and max cost to 0. So I'm looking back at my enchantment. I think I actually want to set the weight way up so it is much more likely to be found in the enchanting table. And I'll say the min cost is like 1 and the max cost is 10. Let's go with that. Okay, and now I've actually made changes to the enchantment file, so I do have to restart the server for this one. I'll be right back. Okay, let's see if that worked. Let's see if I can find the example. Oh, there it is. It's very high on the weight, so it shows up. It's actually giving me example 3 on all of these, which is kind of crazy. Okay, I think I know why it was giving me such a high level, and it's because I left these per level above first as all having a cost of 0. So basically what that means is that every single level of this enchantment is going to cost the same amount. So if I want it to give me lower levels or a wider spread of levels, I should probably set these zeros to something higher. But you get the idea. That's a custom enchantment added to an enchanting table. Now, one little disclaimer about the enchanting table. I actually heard from one of my friends, I believe it was DQRDC, that the only things you can enchant in the enchanting table are the things that you can already enchant in the enchanting table by default. So, while it is totally possible for me to define an enchantment that is designed for sticks, because sticks don't typically get enchanted by enchanting tables, you can't add that functionality, which may be a bug, but that seems to be the way it is. But other than that, if you have any item that you can already enchant with something in the vanilla game, then you can add any enchantment and have that enchantment show up in the enchanting table. Now, there are other places you can actually get these enchantments to show up besides just the enchanting table. You can add it to on mob spawn equipment to get it to show up on mobs that naturally spawn with equipment in the world. You can add it to on random loot to get it to show up on items that you find in loot chests. On traded equipment allows it to be applied to equipment that is sold to you by villagers. And tradable allows villagers to sell books with that enchantment. And on the topic of trading, double trade price will actually cause the emerald cost of the enchantment to be double what it is in the enchanting table. Now the last one I want to talk about is curse, and this is a very useful one. Any enchantment in this tag will show up red in the tooltip, and you also won't be able to remove that enchantment with a grindstone. So if I go back to my data pack and define curse as a tag, and make sure my enchantment is in there, now if I reload, example 3 shows up red on my sword. And if I try to remove this enchantment using a grindstone, it won't be removed. There are many reasons why I love turning enchantments into curses, and I'm going to get into that in the next episode of this series. And speaking of which, this feels like a good place to end off this episode. It's already been pretty long. We covered how to add an enchantment into the game, how to put it on an item, how to put it in the enchanting table, and how to make it a curse if you want to. Now in the next episode, we will be covering everything that these enchantments can actually do. Because as of right now, this enchantment does nothing. All the other vanilla enchantments in the game have all these crazy effects and all these crazy things they can accomplish, and all this crazy logic that is completely built into the enchantment. And next time, I will be showing you how to achieve all of that. So, stick around if you want to see that, and thank you so much for watching. I will see you very soon, my dudes.